How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble. I'm Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yomi Chullin, Daf 21 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, Daf Yomi is a very kind of zvachimi kind of daf. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about Melikah. Some interesting topics here, but very, very kind of zvachimi, in my opinion. First of all, we have a nice healthy chunk to do on Daf Yomi Beis. Again, interesting stuff, I would argue, but very zvachimi in my view. Okay, says me. 4 sections of today's daf. Section number 1: broken necks for animals and birds. So if you have an animal or bird with a broken neck, what happens when you do shechita? What's the result? Melikah with a knife. Now, Melikah, of course, is done with fingernails. We are going to discuss certain implications of when Melikah is done with a knife. Broken necks for people. We'll also learn about other random circumstances for people and animals. And finally, we will have a discussion about Melikah for olas, ha-oaf. How many simanim need to be sliced and to what extent. So, yeah, a very kind of technical, zvachim-y kind of daf in my view. But, nonetheless, we're of course going to have a great time learning it. And let's jump in and learn Daf Yomi of Masechta Chullin. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, we have a healthy chunk to do on Daf Yomi Beis. So we will begin on Daf Yomi Beis, second wide line. Amr Zeiri says, Zeiri, Nishbira mafrekes virov basar ima nevela. Okay, says Zeiri, that so the Rambam on this statement of Zeiri, he says that this is talking about either animals or birds. Okay, I will go with the Rambam that this is a statement about animals or birds. However, since we're going to be spending a lot of time discussing Melikah today, and Melikah is obviously talking about birds, so I'm going to be let's just talk about birds so that we can keep things unified and consistent. So say you have a bird and that bird's neck breaks. Now, I'm not quite clear on how exactly the necks and the meat of the necks kind of work. Maybe Reb Zak, if you know, so then let us know. Akoponim. So if it comes to the neck bone of the bird, and I guess there's like meat on the neck bone of the bird. So what does he say? He says Nishbra mafrekes. So if that neck bone of the bird breaks, the rov basar ima, and on the neck bone there is a lot of meat, and if that meat also gets like disconnected from the bone, so a real mess. Okay, a real mess. If the neck bone breaks and all the meat gets all messed up, so in that case it's a nevela. In that case it is a nevela. Which means that even if you were to go ahead, so if you have a bird, let's say, with a broken neck bone and broken meat of the neck bone, so it's a nevela. There's no way of salvaging it. You could do the best shechita you want from today till tomorrow. It's still going to be a nevela. Okay. Now, Amr Rav Chizda, now says Rav Chizda, Af Onu Nami Tanina, Rav Chizda wants to suggest that we could adduce a raya, a proof, a support. There's people outside yelling. Rav Chizda wants to adduce support for Zeiri's statement from a Mishnah in Masechta Zvachim that says, Malak besakin metame begadim abeis habliya. So the Mishnah in Zvachim says that if one does Melikah with a knife, so it's metame begadim abeis habliya. What does that mean? Essentially, it means that the bird is nevela. So if you have a bird that's being offered as a korban, now normally you would do Melikah with your fingernail. You would push your fingernail into the back of the kohen would push his fingernail into the back of the neck of the bird and do Melikah that way. If one did Melikah with a knife, however, says the Mishnah Masechta Zvachim that it is essentially it's nevela. Mitami b'gad ma'beis habliya, essentially nivlas of tahor as a special type of tuma. It's not mitami tumas maga. If you touch it, you don't become tummy. You become tummy when you eat it, and then you become tummy. Your clothing becomes tummy. Okay. Now, essentially it's nevela, and therefore it's tummy. So Rav Chizda wants to bring a proof to suggest that this Mishnah is a proof for Zeiri. What did Zeiri say? Zeiri said that if you have a bird or an animal, but we're talking about bird. If you have a bird with a broken neck, so now he also said a broken neck and kind of all the meat around it. Okay, but let's just focus on the broken neck for now. So if you have a bird with a broken neck, so it's a nevela. A bird with a broken neck is a nevela, and there's nothing you can do to fix that. You can do the best, most kosher shechita in the world that you can possibly do, but it's nevela. It's already nevela. It's too late. And says the Mishnah Masechta Zvachim that if you do Melikah not as you're supposed to do it with your fingernail, but rather with a knife, so what are you doing effectively, friends? So Melikah is from the back of the neck. So you're basically sticking a knife into the back of the neck, breaking the neck of the bird. And, so according to Zeira, by breaking the neck of the bird, it's now a nevela, right? So essentially that seems to be what the Mishnah is saying. You're sticking a knife into the back of the neck of the bird. The neck is being broken now. The bird now has a broken neck. When you then continue to insert the knife and you slice now the simanim, the trachea and the esophagus, it's going to be mitam b'gad ma'beis habliya. It's not going to help. It's not going to be a proper shechita. You already broke the neck. It's already a nevela. And therefore, it's tummy, tumas nevela. It's an avatuma. Mitami b'gad ma'beis habliya, since it's a nivlas of tar. So again, Amr of Chizda says of Chizda, afan namitanina, we can also adduce support for Zeiri's statement from a Mishnah, Masechta Zvachim, Malak Besakin, that if a person does Melikah from the back of the neck of the bird with a knife, however, instead of his fingernail, Mitam Begad Ma'beis Habliya, the bird, if one eats it, Bebeis Habliya, in the swallowing, in the throat. So if one swallows it, if one takes a bite out of it, so he'll become tummy, so will his clothing, because it's nevela, nivlas of tor. And that's because we want to argue that when the knife is inserted into the back of the neck, it breaks the back of the neck, making it a nevela. Even when the knife continues to be inserted and slices through the simanim, the trachea and the esophagus, it's not going to help. It's already a nevela, it's already tummy. And if you would say, no, breaking the neck is not a nevela, if you want to say it's not like Zeiri, if you want to say that breaking the neck is not a nevela, it's a treifa. Well, the thing is, when you slaughter a treifa, it's not tummy. Nevela is tummy. But if you slaughter an animal and it turns out it's a treifa, it's not tummy. It's treifa, it's not nevela. Now, treifa, but if you're going to tell me that breaking the neck is not like Zeiri says, if you're going to tell me breaking the neck is not a nevela, rather it's a treifa, Melikasa zo ishchitasa. The thing is, you did Melikah with what? With a knife. A knife is kosher for shchita. So if the condition of breaking the neck did not make it a nevela, but rather a treifa, well, you're doing Melikah with a knife should be kosher for shchita, and so if we're saying that breaking the neck just makes it a treifa, okay, so you stick the knife through the back of the neck, you make it a treifa, you then continue inserting the knife into the neck, and you slice through the simanim, so it should be considered shchita of a treifa, and it would not be nevela. It would not be matami begadim abeis habliya. Rather, from the fact that the Mishnah in Masechta Zvachim says that if you do Melikah with a knife, so then the result is that the bird will be matami begadim abeis habliya. It is matami. It is nevela. So then clearly breaking the neck makes the bird a nevela, like Zeiri says. Because otherwise, tahani la sakin netira midei nevela. Because otherwise, if as we mentioned a minute ago, if breaking the neck was only a treifa, merely a treifa, so then the sticking the knife into the back of the neck, the knife should then be, if it was only a treifa, so sticking the knife into the back of the neck would make the bird a treifa, and then the vitahani la sakin, and then the knife should succeed the Tyra Midei Nevela to then do a proper Shechita and salvage it from being Nevela. But rather from the fact that it is Nevela must mean, like it's Zeiri is saying, that breaking the neck makes the bird a Nevela. Okay. To which the Gemara says, this is not a hard fast. Is that the hard fast? Maybe. This is not a hard fast. I don't know if that's a word. I feel like 80% it's a word. A hard fast rule. That's like a real thing. It's like a real rule. So we're saying it's not like a bulletproof rule kind of thing. Because sorry, I had like something stuck in my gums. Okay. Now, where were we? It's not a hard fast rule because you could argue Amri Hasam Mishum Delav Shchita Hi Klal. Rather, the reason, excuse me, I need to take some water. There's something bothering me. Excuse me. Thank you. So where are we? So I can argue that the reason why, when it comes to the Mishnah in Zvachim, I can argue that the reason why the Melikah with the knife makes the bird a nevela is because Melikah with a knife is absolutely nothing. It's not a shchita bichlal. We were trying to view it as though, well, once you break to the neck, now you have a knife. A knife is kosher for shchita, so you're basically doing shchita on a bird with a broken neck. No. You're not doing shchita. We want to say, once you break through the neck with the knife, and then you get to the simanim, you're basically going to now be doing shchita on the simanim. So you're doing shchita on a bird with a broken neck. And therefore the question is, how do we view a bird with a broken neck? Do we view it like an avela, in which case it's tummy, or do we view it like a treifa, in which case it wouldn't be tummy? We say, well, the Mishnah says that it is tummy, so it must be that we view the broken neck like an avela rather than a treifa. And that's why even though you're doing a kosher shchita, but you're doing a kosher shchita on a bird with a broken neck is an avela. Doing Melikah with a knife is not shchita. It's nothing. And that's why it's an avela. And that's why it's an avela. It's not because breaking the neck per se makes something an avela. Meaning, Zeiri had said breaking the neck makes it an avela. We tried to bring a raya from the Mishnah in Zvachim. We're saying the Mishnah in Zvachim is not a raya only because doing Melikah with a knife is nothing. It's not a proper. There's no shchita there. Melikah with a knife. It's just killing the bird. Of course, it's an avela, but it's not considered like you're doing shchita on a bird with a broken neck. No, it's considered like you're doing something that's killing it, but it's not shchita. And that's why, obviously, if it's a shchita, the Rambam says, right, shchita psula is nevela. Okay, now, so where are we? So we say, midi, okay, all right, also mishum dilav shchita yiklal. So we say, I could argue that the reason why the Mishnah in Masechtas Zvachim says it's nevela is because it's bichlal, not shchita. So there's no rayas to be brought about doing shchita on an animal or a bird with a broken neck. There was no shchita b'chal. That's why it's nevela. My time. Why is there no shchita b'chal? Interesting. We give two possibilities here, both interesting. Rav Huna Amar mipnei shu machlib. Rav Huna says, because, friends, let's even go weiter for a second. It says Rabba, I think you change it to Rabba. Rabba Amar Mipnei Shehu Dores. Friends, if you remember the 5 psulim of Shchita, one of the 5 is Chalada, burrowing. Another of the 5 is pressing down, Durasa. So Rav Huna says that the reason why Melikah with a knife renders the bird an avela is because it's not a shchita bichlal. Why is it not a shchita bichlal? Because it's borrowing. Very interesting. Machlekes Rashi and Tosfos about how to understand. Well, what does it mean? It's borrowing. How to understand? So Tosfos actually says, like I understood, borrowing, which is ba'atzim. You get it. Well, I think that the standard explanation of one standard explanation of borrowing would be, for example, if you have a sheep and the sheep is on its back and its neck is kind of facing up, and you kind of take the knife and you stick it down, you kind of dig into the neck below the trachea and the esophagus, below the simanim, or even below one of the simanim, and then you slice upwards. Instead of slicing down, you're kind of getting under, you're kind of borrowing under the simanim and slicing upwards. So that is borrowing. Now, what's interesting about this case is that you're inserting the knife. You're not kind of borrowing into the neck. You're inserting the knife into the back of the neck. So let's actually start with Rashi. So Rashi has an interesting shita here, which is that. So Rashi is interesting shita over here. Okay, first of all, one thing I want to point out about borrowing, as the Gemara is going to say it in another few minutes, borrowing is like a weasel, right? Chulda is a weasel, right? So chalada is like, it's like a weasel that kind of burrows under a house. You can't see it. It's like underneath the ground. You can't see it. So normally borrowing again would be like you borrow kind of underneath the simanim and then pull up. So now here you're coming in from the back of the neck. So now Rashi points out that, normally when you would do a shchita, as we know already from the first daf, the second daf, I can't remember. I think the first or second daf of Masechta Chullin, as you slice through the trachea and the esophagus, I think it was that early on, no, maybe it was later. It was talking about the red hot knife. So we had said that as you slice through the trachea and the esophagus, they kind of open up, right? So when you think, this is how I understand Rashi. It's a little bit tricky. It's not super duper clear, but this is how I understand Rashi. I think it's on track. I think. Anyways, so when you do a shchita normally, as we've learned about a while ago already, as you slice through the simanim, they kind of open up, right? Which is why if you use a red hot knife, we said it's okay because the slicing is happening before the burning, and then the simanim open up and the sides of the blade won't be burning the simanim as they're coming in contact with them, because they're already opening up and they kind of split open and go in different directions, and the sides of the knife won't be touching them, right? So as you slice through the simanim, they kind of open up, which means that isn't really borrowing. So if you were to be slicing through the back of if you would be inserting the knife into the back of the neck, so on the one hand, you could say it's not really borrowing, because, if you're coming in from the back of the neck, as you get to the simanim, they're just going to kind of open up. You're not really borrowing. Borrowing is like to dig into something, but you're not. You're just like kind of, I guess, let's say slicing or let me think for, what was it? Slicing? Right. Okay, fine. Anyways, so right. So I think we're going to say, according to the shita, you can even potentially slice. For I think we're saying that according to this shita, you can even slice for Melikah. So let's say you're slicing into the back of the neck. So if you're going to kind of be slicing through the simanim, so it's not really borrowing, because as you you're not like digging into it. As you slice, it kind of opens up. But says Rashi, what happens with Melikah is that as you go into the back of the neck, the bones don't really open up for you. They're bones, and what ends up happening is the bones kind of create friction. You end up having to kind of slice through the bone, and you're kind of borrowing into the bone. That's how Rashi explains the concept of chalada over here, of borrowing. That you're kind of, as you slice into the back of the neck, you're like borrowing into the bone, as opposed to when you're just slicing directly into the simanim and they just kind of open up for you as you slice into them. You're not really borrowing into them. But here, because you're slicing into bone, you're borrowing into them. Tosfos just says, well, you just push it. You're borrowing because you're going from the bottom up as opposed from the top down. Okay. Fine. Okay. Now where are we? So that was borrowing. So that was Rav Huna. Now Rabbah says it's because it is pressing. That when this kind of standard version of Melikah with the fingernail is that you just take your fingernail and you insert it into the back of the neck and you push. You don't go back and forth. And that's, we learned about, was it yesterday, the day before, you can potentially go back and forth. It's a machlekes. But essentially you take your fingernail and the pashtus says you take your fingernail and you insert it into the back of the neck. So here also, you're taking the knife and you're just going to be inserting it into the back of the neck. And therefore it's drasa, it's pressing. You're not allowed. So therefore so we're answering the question of, when you do Melikah with a knife, it's bechlal not shchita. Why is it bechlal not shchita? Well, according to Rav Huna, because you're borrowing, which is a pasul shchita. According to Rabbah, it's because you're pushing into the back of the neck, and that's drasa, which also is a pasul shchita, and therefore it's bechlal not shchita, which explains why the bird is in nevela. Okay, I need to drink a stick of water, and we'll go weiter. Okay, so let's read in Nachamo. Right, so we said, I'm also mishum delav shchita because it's not shchita klal, it's not shchita at all. My time, why is it not shchita at all? Rav Huna amar mipnei she'u machlid. Rav Huna says it's because you're burrowing into the back of the neck, into the bone, and you're burrowing into the bone to get to the siman. Rabba Omer says, Rabba mipnei she'u doris is because you're pushing the knife into the back of the neck rather than slicing. Mandar mipnei she'u machlid. Rav Huna says that it's on account of borrowing. My time lo amar mipnei she'u doris. Why not say like Rabba that it's because of pushing into the back of the neck? Kosover molech umevi b'Melikah kosher, because it says, well, you don't have to necessarily push into the back of the neck. You can also go back and forth, and it wouldn't be drasa. Manda Amar mipnei she'u doris, and according to Rabba who says it's because of drasa, my time lo amar mipnei she'u machlid. Why not say that it's because of borrowing? Amalach chalada echidami. How is borrowing kechulda, like a weasel? Ha dara beikri bottom, that lives beneath in the foundations, below the foundations of houses. The mechasya, that they're hidden. Hacha amigalia. Here you could see the knife. It's not exactly, you're pushing the knife into the back of the neck. You could see it. It's sticking out the whole time, and it's not exactly borrowing. And there would be an issue about pushing, about pressing, according to Rav Huna. Okay. Amar Ravit. Okay, Zeo. So what have we said so far? Friends, who can tell me what we said so far? What we said so far is that Zeiri says that a broken neck for an animal or for a bird, and when the neck breaks, also the meat on the neck gets disconnected from the neck as well. So that renders the bird or the animal a nevela. Rav Chizda wanted to try and bring a raya from a Mishnah in Zvachim about Melikah with a knife, but we said that is not necessarily a raya because it wouldn't be actually considered shchita, either because of chalada or because of drasa. Now, says Ravit, here is the question that I can question on Zeiri. Very interesting question. Mesa omed u molek. Interesting question, right? If what Zeiri is saying is that a broken neck for a bird, or for an animal, but for a bird, a broken neck for a bird is a nevela. So says Rava, if you think about it, how does Melikah work, Bichlal? You take your fingernail, you stick it into the back of the neck, you then continue inserting your fingernail into the back of the neck until it cuts the simanim. Now, if what Zeiri is saying is that once you break the neck, it's a nevela, I don't understand how Melikah works, Bichlal. Because if you're sticking your finger into the back of the neck and it makes it a nevela, well, now it's a nevela. How does pressing it into the neck and now severing the simanim, how is that kosher? By the time you get to the simanim, you already broke through the neck. If breaking through the neck makes it nevela, how does Melikah work, Bichlal? It's nevela. So again, I understand how can you do Melikah on a dead bird, on a bird that's already considered a nevela once its neck has been broken? Abai says, well, olas ha-oaf. Well, in that vein, how b'chlal does an olas ha-oaf work? When it comes to olas ha-oaf, you have to decapitate it. You have to sever both of the simanim. Now, when it comes to a bird, it can be proper shchita already with one siman. So I don't understand how you can be pressing through into that second siman if it's already considered dead after the first siman, right? Debaya shnei simanim, that you have to, right? Melikah of an olas ha-oaf, you stick your fingernail through both simanim, but v'chimesa, omed umolek, I don't understand. Once the fingernail goes through one of the simanim, the bird's already considered dead. How can you continue to do Melikah on a bird that would already be considered dead? On my lay, to which Rava says, no, that's not a problem, because the point there is to mekayim the mitzvah of Havdalah, right? It says by a chatas of velo yavdil, not to decapitate it, but by an olas ha-oaf, you do decapitate it. by an olas, or if you do decapitate it and you burn the head separately from the body. So therefore, even though yes, once your fingernail gets to one siman, technically it's dead, but there's an additional mitzvah of havdalah, of separating of decapitating that, iachi or nami. Well, if that's the case, then you should have to do Melikah. Don't just stop at the simanim, but you should have to go through the skin. Through the skin of the neck as well, not just the simanim, because you have to decapitate it, right? You have to separate it. So Kol answers the Gemara, Kol ma'akev b'shchita ma'akev ba'avdala. Whatever is ma'akev b'shchita, which is the hide, the skin doesn't really matter when it comes to shchita. What's important by shchita is the trachea and the esophagus. Technically speaking, if somehow the animal didn't have skin somehow, it wouldn't affect the shechita. The trachea and the esophagus, on the other hand, does affect the shechita. And anything that is not going to hold up the shechita, well then, it's not a concern by Abdullah either. But let me ask you a question. According to the rabbis, when it comes to Melikah, we're going to see this machlokas at the end of the daf today. According to the rabbis, when it comes to Melikah of a oaf, you have of an olas ha-oaf, the Melikah of an olas ha-oaf, you need to sever both simanim. You have to get, it's not rove is not enough. According to the rabbis, you have to sever both. You have to sever both of the simanim of an olas ha-oaf. Now, however, right, according to the Rabbanan, the lo ma'akve b'shchita. Now, when it comes to shchita, the rabbis would say rove, right, with the first mishnah in the next parak, a majority of the simanim, right, slicing to a majority of the simanim is sufficient. Uma'akve ba'avdala, and yet they'll say that when it comes to a olas ha-oaf, you have to sever both of the simanim. So here we have something that is not ma'akev by shchita, and it is ma'akev by Melikah. So ella ema, rather I'll say, look, kol yeshno b'shchita yeshno ba'avdala v'chol she'eno b'shchita eno ba'avdala. No. Rather what it means is that anything that's relevant to shchita is relevant to Melikah. Hide, which is not relevant at all to shchita, it's also not relevant at all to Melikah, and you don't have to, slice, press through with your fingernail through the hide. Mikol Makom Kasha. Okay, fine. But getting back to our question, Rav had asked the question nonetheless. If Zeiri says that breaking the neck makes the bird a nevela, well, says Rav, I don't understand how Melikah works. Once the fingernail goes through the back of the neck, it breaks the neck. It is now a nevela. How can you continue to sever the simanim and say it's now a kosher? It's not kosher. How could you say that it's now kosher if it was a nevela at the time that you severed the simanim? So Amar Rava says, Rava Ema, I will say, V'chein hu said, this is what you do. Chotech shedra, you carefully break the spinal cord, umafrekes, and the neck bone below rov basar, but you keep, you're careful to keep the meat that's on the neck bone intact, right? As Zeiri had said, going back to the very beginning of the Gemara, Zeiri had said, Nishbra mafrekes viro basar ima nevela. It's not enough that just the neck bone breaks for it to be considered to be a nevela. It has to break, and all of the meat, or most of the meat that's on the neck bone, also has to become disconnected from the neck bone. So what you do for Melikah is that you insert your fingernail while being careful to ensure not to interfere with the meat on the neck bone. So chotech shedra mafreges, you cut through the spinal cord and the neck bone below rov basar without affecting the meat, the majority of the meat that's on the neck bone. Ki zo. And by doing so, you ensure that it does not yet become a nevela, and then you sever the simanim, and only afterwards do you then deal with the meat that is on the back, right? That's on the neck bone of the bird. Okay, gewaldig. Now, kisalik Reb Zera, when Reb Zera made aliyah from Babble to Eretz Yisrael. Ashkechel Reb Asi, he found Reb Ami to Yosef v'Ka'amar Lala Shmaita, that he was saying over the Shita of Zeiri. Amalei Reb Zera says to Reb Ami, V'chi Mesa Omer U'Molek, he asks Reb Ami Rava's question. How could it be that breaking the neck renders the bird a nevela? Well, then, if breaking the neck renders a nevela by sticking one's fingernail through the neck, the bird is now nevela. How could you continue to do the Melikah and sever the simanim? It's already a nevela. Ishtomem kisho achada, and Reb Ami had to think for a moment. Just like the pasuk, there's a quotation from a pasuk in Sefer Daniel, that Daniel also had to think for a minute when he had to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream for him. So Reb Ami ishtomim kisho achada, he had to take some time to think about it. Omar lei, and then finally Reb Ami says, Ema kach u'osa, this is what he does, like we said a minute ago, chotech shedra umafrekes below rov basar, that you cut through the spinal cord and the neck bone without interfering with the meat that is on it, and therefore it is not a nevela, and then you can proceed with the Melikah. Tanan Amiyachi, we also learn a brisa to this end. Kesad Molkin chatas ha-oaf. How do you do Melikah on a chatas ha-oaf? Right, on a chatas ha-oaf. So chatas ha-oaf is just one siman. Chotech shedra umafrekes below rov basar. You stick your fingernail into the back, through the spinal cord and the neck bone, without interfering with the majority of the meat that's on it. Until you arrive, till your fingernail arrives at either the esophagus or the trachea. Once you arrive at those simanim, chotech siman echad or rubo, you then cut through with your fingernail one of the simanim, or the majority of one of the simanim, virov basar imo, and at that point also the majority of the meat that's there. Uva ola, and when it comes to an olas ha-oaf, shnayim or rov shnayim, both simanim, or at least a majority of both of the simanim. Mani fragdi Gemara, I don't understand. Irabanan ha'amri shnayim davka, irabalazu b'Reb Shimon ha'amr rov shnayim davka. We're going to see at the end of today's daf a machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbalazar b'Reb Shimon. Also Rabbi Shmuel is in the machlokas as well. Now we're going to see a machlokas between Rabbalazar and the Chacham about when it comes to olas ha-oaf. Are we talking about severing the simanim entirely or just the majority? The Chacham say it must be entirely. Rabbalazar b'Reb Shimon says it must be a majority, but not entirely. So how could we be saying shnayim o rov shnayim? I don't understand. Iraban, if it's the rabbis, what's o rov shnayim? Ha-amri shnayim davka. It has to be two, not majority of two. Rabbalazar b'Reb Shimon, if it's Rabbalazar b'Reb Shimon, amar rov shnayim davka. It davka needs to be the majority, not two. The majority of two, not the whole thing. So ema shnayim l'Rabbanan, rov shnayim l'Rabbalazar b'Reb Shimon. I'll say, okay, well, the way to understand it is shnayim l'Rabbanan, or rov shnayim l'Rabbalazar b'Reb Shimon. V'bay say, alternatively, hava Rabbalazar b'Reb Shimon, you could say that both are Rabbalazar b'Reb Shimon. Umay shnayim, what does it mean two? After all, he says majority. It means shedom in the shnayim. It means that you should obviously not sever it the whole way, according to Rabbalazar b'Reb Shimon, but you should sever it a clearer majority of the way, not just a slight majority, but a clear majority of the way that it looks, that it's clear that it's been severed, and that there's two, that it's ki'ilu, it's been severed in two, although don't make sure that they're still connected. Oh, rov shnayim, or as long as you do a majority, that also is sufficient. All right, now we will discuss broken necks for people and also all sorts of broken things for living things. Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Nizbira mafrekes virov basar ima, if a person's neck bone, and if a person breaks their neck essentially, and their meat, the meat on like the flesh on their neck gets like disconnected from the neck. I don't know. Maybe Sharna or Reb Niels is somebody familiar with like biology? About flesh on necks. I know it's probably not your specialty, flesh on necks, but how does this stuff work? But anyways, if you break your neck with the flesh on it, so then metami ba'oil. So tumas hames, right? Person's neck, right? Person breaks their neck. There's no questions asked. Tami tumas metami ba'oil. Vim tomar also maise de eli mafrekes beloy roy basar avoy. And if we can say, wait a second, Eli, when Eli in Shiloh heard that the Aram was taken by the Philistines, so it says there, as we'll see in a second, that he broke his neck. It doesn't say anything about the meat on his neck. So if you're going to say, well, maybe breaking your neck alone should be mitami ba'oil. Zikna shiny. It was different because Eli was 98 years old. The Pasuk says, "Vayika azkiro as Aaron Elokim." When it says that a Benjaminite fled from the battlefield to report to Eli that the Aaron had been taken by the Philistines, it says Vayipo me'alakise, that Eli fell off of his chair, Acharon is backwards, Ba'ad yad ashar vatishober mafrakto, and he broke the back of his neck, Bayamos kizakin aish v'chaved v'gomer, and he died because he was old. So we see that, yes, he broke his neck, and it doesn't say anything about the flesh on his neck, but it also says that he was old, and that was part of the reason. Amr b'Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amr Yochanan, Karo kidug. If you tear a person open like a fish, you gut him like a fish. Oh boy. Mitami ba'oil, he will be mitami ba'oil. He will be considered dead, and mitami tumasa oil. Amr Reb Shmuel bar Yitzchak umigabo, and that is talking about from his back. If you have a person who's been torn open like a fish from his back, so then oh boy, mitami tumasa oil. Amr Shmuel asa gistera nevela. Says Shmuel, if a person chops an animal in half, either like literally in half or just like, French style, slice off the head, nevela, it is a nevela. Amar Rabbi Elazar nitala yerech v'chalol shela nevela. I think it basically means if you like cut off the leg. If you cut off the thigh and it's just like there's like it's just kind of missing, I think it's a nevela. Ekidami chalol shela. What's it's like missing stuff? Amaravas is Rava called she revuta veneres chaser. Well, if when it is kind of sitting down, when it kind of like goes down on the ground, you could tell that it's missing something where its leg should be. That is a nevela. Tananasim, we learn in a Mishnah Masechta Oyalos, Hutzu Rashain, if their heads have been popped off. So Rashi says it's talking about sheretz. If you look at the Mishnah Masechta Oyalos, it seems to be talking about animals. So Tosfos Taka says that it is talking about animals. It's got to be behema v'chayev ha-oaf, by animals and birds. Anyways, so if their heads have been popped off, even though they're moving around, tmein, they're like jerking around, nonetheless tmein, they're dead. If their heads have been popped off and let's go weiter. If their heads have been popped off, then they're tmein. Kiznav al-tah, like the tail of a lizard. Shemfar keses, that it jerks around even after it's been cut off. My hutzu, what does it mean that their necks have been popped off? Rish Lakish Omar hutzu mamish. Rish Lakish says it literally means that they've been popped off. Reb Asi Omar Reb Mani ke abdalas olas ha-oaf. Rather, it is like the separation, like the severing of the simanim, the trachea and the esophagus, by an olas ha-oaf. Amar le Reb Yirmiyah l'Reb Asi, this is Reb Yirmiyah to Reb Asi, kavdolas olas ha-oaf l'Rabbanan v'lo palgisu. Is it like the separation of the olas ha-oaf according to the Rabbanan, and you agree with Rish Lakish that it's literally popping off the head? Oh, Dilma, or perhaps Kavzalas olas ha-oaf the Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon ufligisu, or maybe it's like Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon who says that it's just a majority of the simanim, and you argue with Rish Lakish. Omar Lei, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no, Rabasi says to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Kavdolas olas ha-oaf le Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon. It's like Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon that it's not entirely severing it; it's just a majority ufligisu, and we argue. No, ufliginan, and we argue. Ikadam, those who say Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omar Hutsu Mamar says Rish Lakish literally popped off. Rabbi Asi Omar Mani says Rabbi Asi Omar Mani Kavdalas olas ha-oaf lifi Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon Berov Shnaim, like Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon that it's a majority of the two. Okay, what did we just say? Okay, this is what we just said, that we have this Mishnah in Masechta Olas that says that if you pop off the heads of these animals, the Tosfos, so then they are, what do we say, that they're nevela? That they are nevela. Now, Rish Lakish had said, what does it mean popped off? It means literally popped off, that you sever both the trachea and the esophagus. Reb Asi had said that it is like in olas ha-oaf, and we wanted to know, well, in olas ha-oaf, yes, everyone agrees that you have to sever both the trachea and esophagus. However, there's machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon, as we're about to see, that the Chacham said you sever both simanim entirely. So if Rabbi Asi, when he says that the animal heads are being popped off like in olas ha-oaf, if it means like in olas ha-oaf that the simanim are severed entirely, so then Rabbi Asi is be'etzim agreeing with Rish Lakish. If he says that it's like Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon by an olas ha-oaf, which is that you just sever it a majority of the way, but not completely pop it off, so then you don't completely sever the simanim. Well, then if it's only a majority, so then Rabbi Asi is arguing on Rish Lakish, which is what Rabbi Yirmiyah was seeking to clarify, that when Rabbi Asi is comparing this Mishnah of popping off the heads to the olas ha-oaf, is it like Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon that is a majority of the way, in which case he argues with Rish Lakish, or is it like the Chacham that you sever the olas ha-oaf, the simanim entirely, in which case he agrees with Rish Lakish, who says that you mamish pop off the head, and we see that they actually argue. That Rabbi Asi is saying that it's like Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon a majority of the way. So therefore, we have this Mishnah in Masechta Olas that talks about popping off the heads of these animals. Rish Lakish says mamish popping off, and Rabbi Asi says it's like an olas ha-oaf lefi the shita of Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon, that we're just talking about severing the simanim a majority of the way. Already they would be considered nevela and tameh. And for the final segment of Daf Chof Aleph of Masechta Chullin, Melikah for olas ha-oaf, that we've just been talking about, the Melikah of olas ha-oaf. Here we go. We said it's machlokes, the Chacham and Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon. Here is that machlokes. My Rabbanon, umay Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon. What is this machlokes between Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon and the Chacham that we've been discussing for the past several lines? Disanya. Well, we have a brayso of Asheni Yaise Ola Kamishpat. This is talking about a korban ola v'yored that we've already learned about since Masechta Shavuos, that by Shavuos Bitoy, Shavuos Ha'edos, Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav, the korban that one brings is a korban ola v'yored. If you can afford it, you bring a kispa v'seira, an animal. If you can't afford it, so then you bring birds. If you can't afford that, then you even bring a mincha, of course. Minchas chote. But we're talking about the birds now. So you bring a chatas ha-oaf and you bring an olas ha-oaf as well. In the context of the olas ha-oaf, it says, Vesasheni, the second, yase ola kamishpat. I think, is it yase or yase? Oh, I can't see. Yase, I think. I think it says yase. Vesasheni yase ola kamishpat. And the second bird, you make an ola kamishpat. Like what mishpat? Kamishpat chatas behema. That since these birds affected, right, ideally if you can afford it, you bring a kispa v'sira, a chatas behema, an animal. If you can't afford it, so as a replacement for the animal, you could bring birds. So since this ola is kind of part of the replacement for the chatas behemos, when we say kamishpat, like the rules, like which rules? Kamishpat chatas behema, like the rules of a chatas behema. Like the rules of a chatas behema. Ata omer kamishpat chatas behema. Are you saying that the olas ha-oaf is like the chatas behema? O eno ella kamishpat chatas ha-oaf. Maybe it should be like the rules of the ha-oaf, right? Because if you look in the psukim, by the korban ola v'yari that we're talking about, so if you can't afford an animal, so you bring birds. First we describe the ha-oaf, and then we describe the olas. So maybe when it says kamishpat, like the rules by an olas, maybe it means the rules of a ha-oaf. So you make the olas with the same rules as the ha-oaf. So kishu omer v'krivo, well, there's another pasuk in the context of olas ha-oaf by an olas nidava. This is in a different context, right? The psukim we've been talking about is in the 5th chapter of the book of Leviticus. This now is a verse from the 1st chapter of the book of Leviticus, but it is talking about an olas ha-oaf, and it says v'krivo, you will offer it, meaning that it is unique, it is distinct from the chatas ha-oaf. Chilek akosov bein chatas ha-oaf, the olas ha-oaf. There's a distinction. The pasuk makes a distinction between chatas ha-oaf and olas ha-oaf, and therefore don't be saying that we're going to be offering the olas ha-oaf like the chatas ha-oaf. No, rather, umani mekayim kamishpat. So what are these rules that we're talking about? If it's not like the chatas ha-oaf, so in kamishpat chatas behema, that the olas ha-oaf is like the chatas behema. Ma chatas behema eina ba'a ela min chullin. Just like a chatas behema is davka chullin. You have to bring it from chullin. You can't use meiser sheni money, for example. Uvayom, it has to be slaughtered during the day. Uvayado ayumanis, you have to use your right hand. Af olas ha-oaf. Also, when it comes to olas ha-oaf, these 3 things apply. In a ba'al ela min chullin, it comes from chullin. Uvayom, and it is melikah during the day. Uvayado ayumanis, and using your right hand. Imalo halin birov shnaim avkan birov shnaim. Well, when it comes to a chatas behema, the shchita is just a majority of the simanim. So does that mean that by olas ha-oaf also we're talking about a majority of the simanim, not the whole thing? Talmud Omer umalak v'hiktir. This is going back to that pasuk from the 1st chapter of the book of Leviticus. I'll read you the pasuk. V'kriva hakohen el hamizbech umalak es rosho v'hiktir hamizbech. We compare Melikah to Aktara. Ma haktara arosh b'atzmo b'aguf b'atzmo. Just like when it comes to olas ha-oaf, when you burn the bird, you are going to be burning the head separate from the rest of the body. Af Melikah, the same applies to Melikah. Harosh b'atzmo v'aguf b'atzmo. You're going to sever the simanim so that the head and the body are separate. And therefore, that's the shita of the Rabbanon, that by olas ha-oaf, you are going to completely sever the simanim. Now, Rabbi Shmuel, says Rabbi Shmuel, kamishpat chatas ha-oaf. So it says Rabbi Shmuel, it does in fact mean like the mishpat of the chatas ha-oaf, right? So we're talking about the olas ha-oaf, like the rules of what? Like the rules of the chatas ha-oaf. Ma chatas ha-oaf mimul orif, just like by the chatas ha-oaf, but the Melikah of the chatas ha-oaf, it's the back of the neck. Af olas ha-oaf mimul orif, also by the olas ha-oaf, we're talking about the back of the neck. Imal halan molek ve'eno mavdil. Well, then I'll suggest that by the chatas ha-oaf, of course, you're only going to be severing one of the simanim. You're going to be leaving the other, right? Chatas ha-oaf is 1 siman, olas ha-oaf is 2 simans. So I'll suggest that just like by the chatas ha-oaf, you sever 1 siman, so afkan molek ve'eno mavdil b'siman echad, maybe by olas ha-oaf then also you would only sever 1 siman and leave the other. Talmud Omar ve'ekrivo, therefore the pasuk says by olas ha-oaf ve'ekrivo that you will offer it, that it is distinct from the chatas ha-oaf. And while yes, the chatas ha-oaf is 1 siman, the olas ha-oaf is 2 simanim. And now says Rabbi Shimon, kamishpat chatas ha-oaf. It is like the chatas ha-oaf. Malahalan oches birosh uveguf umazeh. Says Rabbi Shimon, when it comes to the chatas ha-oaf, so there's hazah. At the chatas ha-oaf, you sever one of the simanim, and then you kind of shake the bird around towards the mizbeach so that the blood can kind of have a kind of zrika sadam, that the blood could be thrown on the mizbeach, as opposed to the olah, you just press it and squeeze it against the mizbeach. By the chatas ha-oaf, there is, by the olas ha-oaf, you just squeeze it against the mizbeach. By the chatas ha-oaf, there is actual hazah. So when you do the hazah, you hold the body and the head in your hand and you kind of flick it towards the mizbeach. So oches barosh uvaguf, you hold the head and the body, umaze, and you sprinkle towards the mizbeach. Afkan, so also by the olas ha-oaf, oches barosh uvaguf, umaze, or umatze, you're going to be holding the head and the body and pressing against the mizbeach, because by the olah you only press against the mizbeach. You don't actually sprinkle by olas of. Melikah Amar, what are we saying? This is what we're saying. Malahalan, just like by chatas of kishu ochez harosh baguf maze, just like by the olas, by the chatas of, you, because the right, at least one of the simanim is still right. One of the simanim is still connected, is not severed. So you're holding the body and the head in your hand because they are not completely severed, and you sprinkle. So af kan, also when it comes to the olas of kishu ochez harosh baguf maze or matzah, he's going to be pressing the bird against the mizbeach when there is still some connection between the body and the head, that the simanim have not been fully and entirely severed. Well, the chatas of, after all, is just one siman. Maybe the olas of is also just one siman. It says v'krivo, it keeps the olas of distinct from the chatas of, while the chatas of is in fact just one of the simanim. The olas of is both simanim, but says Rabbi Shimon, you are not going to sever both simanim. You will just go a majority of the way. And friends, we're going to stop here a little bit in the middle. We're going to have to pick up in the middle tomorrow. Hopefully it shouldn't be too difficult to get a running start here tomorrow, but we are going to end it here for Daf Chaf Aleph of Masechta Chullin. Daf Chaf Aleph Masechta Chullin was a very kudshimi kind of daf, a lot of focus on Melikah and Nevela, Treifa, Shchita, a lot of stuff here. So broken necks for animals and birds. The Iri says that if you have a broken neck and also majority of the meat is disconnected from the neck, so then it will be considered a nevela. You do Melikah. So then how do you do Melikah? Right? That was Rava's question. Reb Zera asked the same question as well. How then do you do Melikah? Because then once you stick your fingernail into the back of the neck, you're going to be breaking the neck bone. That's going to make the bird a nevela. How could you then continue and sever the simanim? So you have to do it carefully. You have to do Melikah by being gentle and not tearing through the meat on the neck bone. Basically, you stick the fingernail into the back of the neck and careful not to disconnect most of the meat from the neck bone. You then sever the simanim and also then disconnect the meat from the neck bone at that point. Now, we had suggested that maybe a Mishnah in Masechta Zvachim that talked about doing Melikah with a knife could be a support for Zeiri. However, we had said that it is not a support for Zeiri because actually doing Melikah with a knife is just simply not considered Shchita at all. So therefore it wouldn't be considered like you're shechting a nevela because it's not Shchita at all. Rav Huna says it's not Shchita because it's borrowing. You basically borrow. We saw Machlekes Rashi and Tosafos of what that means. Is it because you're borrowing into the bone when you're kind of cutting into the bone, or is it just simply because you're going from the bottom up on the simanim, like Tosafos says? Rabbah says that it's possible because you're pressing into the simanim rather than slicing them. We discussed broken necks for people. That if a person's neck is broken and most of the meat on the neck, well, then they will be metame tumas oil. They'll be considered dead, and we had all sorts of different scenarios where people and animals would be considered dead. And we talked about Melikah for olas ha-oaf. The Chacham / Rabbi Yishmael say that you cut entirely through both simanim, whereas Rabbi Shimon says you cut through a majority of both simanim. Friends, that was the Chaf Aleph of Masechta Chullin. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Cheers.